Bits of thread. Jackson thought it was a spiderweb brushing his neck, and he shuddered, goosebumps rising on his skin. Using the Beretta, he brushed it away, only to see it was an errant thread of yarn. He was new to this, but he had to admit, the only thing scarier than the monsters was the fact that they'd hide in an arts and crafts superstore. Blinking red and green lights bathed the store in eerie mockery of Christmas, but if the lights hadn't drawn his attention through the snow, he never would have been looking at the store at all. He had seen it purely by accident, and he had no business with his trainer's gun on top of it all. He was 14, and he was one of 2 survivors of a Walker breakout in Maine. He was still learning to shoot. Learning. He wasn't nearly there yet. But when he saw the mass of red and black pull the man inside the door and lock it, he knew he had to act. He had broken in and pursued them, but the screams had stopped minutes ago. Looking down, he saw bubbling dark liquid pooling from under an adjacent rack, small pieces of flesh dotting the crimson. Wait, adjacent, he thought. Eyes wide, he cast his eyes up and saw it. Perched on the top of the tall shelves, it had been following him this whole time, since the minute he entered the store. It screeched with a mouth not meant to scream and leapt for the hunter. By the time the next pedestrian walked past the store, the screaming was long done. And so was Jackson. Introduction. Take Back the Night. It's 1998, and White Wolf is marketing the 1999 role-playing event in all of their books. At the far back of each one is a tease, orange and white flames. AnonymousLiberty.com is marketed with fairly impressive subtlety, and the culmination to the year of the reckoning was the release of, you guessed it, Hunter the Reckoning. Now it needs to be said, as of the release of this title, it was painfully overpowered. It began the trend of White Wolf authors and creators overpowering the next core books to compensate, with the culmination of Demon the Descent. However, with the release of Hunter, I personally found myself in my element. Hunters Hunted had always been a favorite of mine, but now, they cranked my monster killers up to 11, and considering I played like 1 of 10 imbued on AOL at the time with the White Wolf chats, I was absolutely in murder mode. So you may be asking, hey, I also want to murder the shit out of my supernatural friends and family. Where do I start? Here and now. It's always here and now. This isn't a small guide, just poking at an introduction. We're going to get very in-depth here, with further in-depth guides to follow. This isn't meant to cleanse your palate for dinner, but to fill you up with academic role-playing love before we stare down H5, or Hunter the Reckoning 5th edition. No, there haven't been 5 editions, but it will be set within the same kind of gameplay and framework style that they've been using for, V5 or Vampire 5th edition and the Werewolf 5th edition that they're also working on. A warning though, this game is over 20 years old at this point, so there will be spoilers. Some of what I'm pulling from will include the Time of Judgment and bits and pieces from the other books. I will not, however, be attempting to tie this in any way to exalt it. I'm clarifying that because during that time, White Wolf was getting ready to drop their new game and even marketed it as a soft kind of prequel of sorts to the World of Darkness. We'll be ignoring that and the little bits of things linking the two, as they're absolutely not canonized together, and it's just, no, hard pass. So this is pure, old school, gothic punk, World of Darkness. Welcome home. Setting. Jody is a lovely lady. She works at the grocery store, gives to charity, and at night, she turns to fog and goes into her neighbors' homes, showing her true form to the infants and toddlers of town, eating their fears. They smile at her in the market, exhaustion behind the bags in their eyes. Spencer works in accounting, and he's a little off. His eyes are a little too big, pupils a little too small, and flies tend to follow him around. Once in a while, when nobody is looking, he makes a snack of them. They smell the rotten blood on him. The rot is his. The blood is not. The crossing guard at Elmwood Elementary hides his grimace behind his face mask and shades. He ushers the children across and debates which one he is going to make into abstract art tonight. The blood and bone make for excellent work. Monsters are all around us, day and night, at home and away, and they have managed to make their way into our world with, to be real, very little effort. Humanity loves to be lied to and led, and the supernatural entities of the gothic punk setting of the World of Darkness would be remiss to not take advantage of that cold fact. Many believe God has abandoned us, and they're right. But we're not completely discarded like so much trash on the side of the road. We have the messengers. They do not live. God may have left the building, but not all of the celestial host have followed their deadbeat dad. While some left and some fell, something we'll touch on later, a number stayed behind to watch over their father's children. Heartbroken and ashamed, they saw as the supernaturals ran rampant through the world, desecrating the grand creation. However, due to, well, a video I'll get to eventually, shit goes south, like bad, end of the world kind of South, and the remaining hosts said, enough. While knowing that they could not intervene directly, not as a good option at least, they began empowering or imbuing mortals seemingly at random. Mortals of the everyday variety had the veils placed by monsters before their eyes ripped away, though not always visually. The first part we'll discuss is Second Sight. Those of you that also follow the Chronicles of Darkness, you'll know that a book has the same name. Not surprisingly, it was definitely influenced by this among some other works. But in the World of Darkness, Second Sight is how the messengers communicate with and show they're imbued what the world, and the creatures crawling over it, truly are. Perhaps a booming voice in their heads screams, "Suffer not a witch to live," causing them to look at a mage innocently crossing the street. To everyone else they look average, but to the imbued they seem sinister and overwhelmingly reek of brimstone. Another may see the addict on the street for what they really are, not a beggar, but a leech, a vampire shrouded in rags to hide amongst the sheep. Blood drips from their mouth in puddles, fangs pass their bottom jaw. It is certainly an exaggeration, but since that is how the messengers see them, that's how the hunters will as well. In any case, let's slow down a moment before we advance and think about how completely awful and traumatizing this must be to the newly imbued. This well-crafted gilded cage, crafted by timeless and ageless horrors, falls apart, but just for you. Most of the time at least. Regardless, once imbued, even the most conventional of daily practices becomes a nightmare. Imagine stepping into a 7-Eleven for a pack of cigarettes, only to see a second person superimposed over the cashier, with ephemeral puppet strings controlling their every move. In your shoes, what are you to do? You have 3 choices. Keep acting like you don't see it, flee, or confront them. That leads to one of 3 outcomes. Safety for you with the creature still out there, your imprisonment, or your death. Let's raise the stakes even higher. You go to drop your child off at school only to see their elementary school teacher has bright, inhuman yellow eyes and smells of the grave. At this point, pretending nothing is wrong is out of the question. You're not going to leave your children or anyone else's with this thing. So what now? You get my point. Now, while I'm going to avoid most mechanics at the second, allow me to give a bright side to this illuminating quote-unquote gift. So far, I've discussed the negatives of Second Sight without the pluses. First off, the vast majority of supernatural mind control or influence doesn't work on you as long as you have Second Sight active. You could have an ancient vampire Methuselah trying to use Dominate, the discipline on them, or an Archmage could be using the Mind Sphere. To no result the supernatural wishes for. Literally burn a conviction, Second Sight's active, it doesn't work. Now, this regular person has a few moments of control in an otherwise outmatched scenario. The monster will not be aware at first that their little snack or toy has the ability to say no. And in that moment, when their guard is down, that is when the imbued has a chance to live up to their name. They are hunters, the reckoning for the things in the dark that have held reign for far too long. The whole point of imbuing these seemingly random people was for one reason, to take back the night. Second Sight is but one major tool in these hunters' arsenals. For starters, these imbued have multiple ways to communicate with one another that, save for very rare exceptions, are near impossible for monsters to crack. The first is the word, a series of symbols that are only visible to the hunters with Second Sight active. This is a means to mark territory or perhaps warn other imbued that certain groups or creeds have claimed that area as their own or it's under their protection. Now, while it's noted that towards the time of judgment that many unimbued mortals began being able to see these things, it needs to be noted that up until that time frame, should you wish to implement it, that even normal mortals are unable to see the word or code. So no, even a leech's ghoul would not be able to see it, unless of course somehow that ghoul was suddenly imbued, and that's a whole other can of worms. Also to note that due to the messengers that other methods of supernatural manipulation are also undone and no longer work on the imbued with Second Sight. No, your hunter cannot also get any manner of vitae bonuses if ghouled, and no wolfkin are going to be imbued anytime soon. You're not going to be playing mix and match with the min-maxer here. Another useful method the hunters have to communicate is the web forum HunterNet. This was an online forum meant for the imbued to talk to one another and plan, and for quite some time was completely guarded and safe from supernaturals by the webmaster Witness 1. For the record, I'm mostly pulling from the core book here. There are others involved with HunterNet security, but hey, you want more guides later, so I just can't do it all at once, man. So, HunterNet had many sublists, namely one for each creed. The iteration that remained, again ignoring the time of judgment for now, was its second. HunterNet has been infiltrated twice primarily to the best of the hunter community's knowledge, and some, including Witness One, argue that it was never infiltration to begin with, but that the messengers themselves led them there to assist with the Great Hunt. Mind you, in order to find HunterNet, you need to be able to do a few things. One, there is a front website called Anonymous Liberty, where Witness One and others screen you. Secondly, you need second sight to get there. In fact, 2 letters of the code are hidden in the banners, the codes for Hope and Protected. Of course, there are rules as well. They are as follows. Rule number 1, post only minimal information about yourself. Number 2, do not abuse or threaten other hunters. Rule number 3, HunterNet is only a tool. Rule number 4, reading doesn't make you an expert. To note, many sublists have their own sets of rules to follow, but as we go deeper and cover each creed individually, we'll save those for later. So now that we've covered Second Sight, the word, and HunterNet, we get to move on to talking about the best part of being imbued. Let's talk the biggest one. Let's talk edges. Getting edgy. Before we get hip deep into this badassery, we need to clarify a couple of things about edges. It's extremely easy to confuse how they work at times, so I'll break this down piece by piece and part by part. I want you to understand these well for a few reasons. One being that, well, as a kid, I had zero idea how they worked. I thought you could turn them on and off at a whim as a starting character and really didn't take into account the effects higher levels of virtue would have on your character. The next being a little disclaimer. Remember how I mentioned that at a certain point the games began having some balance issues? Hunter is overpowered. Argue it all you want, but this game is driven by one major purpose predominantly. Kill monsters. And damn, this game gives you the means to do it. Which also means storytellers have some responsibilities in keeping their hunters role-playing versus not dice role-playing. I'll get to how this happens as we go along, but I wanted you to have a heads up in this regard. Players will try to power game this one. Hell, that's kind of the point. But the real thing players need to remember is that 99% of the time, you are not playing trained fighters or killers. Hunters are your neighbors, aunts, uncles, parents, grandparents, pizza delivery drivers, keyboard warriors, right-wing extremists, left-wing extremists. These are normal people, granted the ability to fight back, even if they don't know what they're fighting. They don't know who the messengers are. They don't even know how to turn their abilities on and off or their second sight on or off at the beginning. The fatality rate of the imbued is insane. They do not have a numbers advantage on monsters. They don't have anything on them, except the ability to resist, secretly. With that said, let's dig into what you're here for, the edges. Edges are powers and abilities granted to the imbued for a multitude of purposes. They can allow a hunter to secretly track their prey or even do aggravated damage using melee weapons or thrown objects to supernaturals. These edges fall under one of 3 virtues. The White Wolf Wiki describes the following ways. Mercy. Their compassion and capacity for forgiveness, perhaps even for the most heinous of horrors, they believe some souls are worth saving. Vision. Awareness of options and possibilities, and awareness of the big picture at stake in the war. Zeal. Faith in themselves, their cause, or in some belief that motivates them to continue their fight. So, each hunter group, or creed, has a specific primary virtue they are tied to. More importantly, though, is this. Edges have to be triggered, at least in the early to middle stages of surviving being a hunter. I'll give you an example. An Avenger, a hunter driven by the Zeal virtue, has an edge called Cleave. This edge turns a melee weapon the hunter is holding into a charged up weapon for 3 turns that does aggravated damage to any supernatural. Of course, there's a few catches. For the sake of an argument, this brand new imbued hunter is a home robber. He was popping open a first-story window of a dilapidated home with his crowbar, then he makes his way inside. The home seems mostly empty, but the door to the basement is wide open. Making his way down, he finds a casket, and a person hauling themselves out of it. Suddenly he hears a voice. "They feed on the children." And the veil is ripped from his eyes. See, this man lost his son some years ago. Straight up went missing after school one day. The thing stands up. Its chest heaves in a mockery of breath it no longer needs, and the man backs up against the wall a moment. Then he narrows his eyes. Rage. It fills him to the point of bursting, and that was the trigger. Cleave activates, and the crowbar begins seething in his hands, but it doesn't hurt him. The monster smiles, thinking he has his next meal cornered, until the man launches himself at him, bringing the bar across his face and removing his lower jaw. The thing tries to will blood to it, to heal, but like I said, this is aggravated damage. The wound is cauterizing shut even as the thing blinks in disbelief. It looks at the man, as shocked as it is, but the man swings again. And again. 3 turns later, as he goes to keep swinging, the bar shatters in his hand, but it doesn't matter at this point, the thing is long dead. But do you see what I mean? Virtue, edge, trigger, effect, what happens when the effect ends. Obviously, as I'm sure you could tell before we even talk creeds, each virtue has a different style of edge that get classified within them. Zeal edges typically are based more on the aggressive side, vision a bit in the middle ground, and, defense. Mercy. I'm just losing my mind. And vision, more benefiting the hunter while not injuring others. So, again, edges, zeal is aggressive, mercy is more defensive, and vision is more like foretelling. However, edges get further classification past just the virtue they represent. In fact, some of the edges are exclusive to specific types of hunters. These are the specific classifications of edges: vengeance, defense, solitude, innocence, judgment, martyrdom, redemption, visionary, and obedience. Instead of going one by one here as we move on to creeds, I'll detail their specific unique edge and touch upon it, as I'll likely be making another further guide specifically detailing each edge. So we're going to move right along to which hunter uses each edge by tackling creeds. With arms wide open. I feel really gross using that as my segue title. Anyways, as hunters spawn almost at random, no 2 imbued are the same, even if they are imbued at the same time and place, which happens a lot. The creed you end up tied to is based on your morals and your virtues, so you could end up with a nauseating potpourri of different hunters from the same spot. They likely don't even care for one another. That doesn't matter. After all, soldiers are likely to have different opinions of one another after having each other's six in the trenches. Despite all of the randomness with the messengers imbuing, there are rhymes and reasons as to why the virtues awaken within that type of hunter and their creed. A hunter creed is how the hunters, and even the messengers, title and envision themselves as imbued. The Hunter Core book has 7 creeds, though in actuality there are at least 9. The 2 added later are the Waywards, which are a group of zeal-maddened borderline or not borderline psychopaths, and Hermits, vision-locked hunters that are never disconnected from the voices and presence of the messengers. They don't turn on and off second sight, it never turns off, which is awful. Non-stop angel radio. For this guide, I'll be hitting the 7 major creeds while giving the so-called lost creeds in a separate guide. This is already going to be a lengthy one, and we're not close to done. We'll start alphabetically. Please bear in mind as we go through this that each one is an archetype, and despite the descriptors I'll use, each hunter is unique and often have their own take individually on the hunt, not just based on their creed. Here we go. Defenders, the thin red line. These hunters guard what other hunters take back, setting up neighborhood watches and the like. Though they are called defenders, many of these zeal-driven imbued remember that the best defense is a monster-shredding offense. Innocence, the blessed. These guys, ugh. The innocent believe that often the monsters seem worse than they truly are and just don't get how the world is. Sometimes they may even go against other imbued to protect monsters, finding them misunderstood. Ironically, to those that play other game lines in the World of Darkness, well, they're not always wrong. But being real, their mercy-driven mindsets more often than not get them slaughtered, as well as the people they're trying to protect. Judges, justices. These zeal-driven hunters see themselves as almost lawyers or balance keepers in this monster-dominated world. But what they find truly scary is how often the mortals they come across are worse than the monsters. It's not just the undead destroying our world. Judge fairly, lest ye be judged. Martyrs, masochists. Mercy being their virtue, these hunters understand mankind is as complicit as the monsters, and thus to bring punishment, they have to punish themselves. They will literally fight this fight until they drop. Redeemers, deprogrammers. Sometimes evil isn't a mind state, it's a disease. And like any disease in time, it can likely be resisted or cured. These mercy-driven imbued seek the human in the beast, often to the frustration of other hunters. They wish to save those that can't save themselves. Avenger, Knights, the Wrath of God. My obvious favorite, these guys are here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and on second thought, take that bubblegum and ram it sideways through that cold, dead fuckhole of yours. Zeal virtue. I'm not giving you a head start. Visionary, Pathfinders. Obviously vision virtue driven, they look past the troubles of today to find their way to a better tomorrow. Sometimes eradication isn't the solution, but coexistence. Or maybe they're not monsters, just different alien species hiding here for safety. Yeah, they're nuts, but fun nuts. Hunting in a world of darkness. So, we've covered the basics of what a hunter is and what a hunter can do, but the part I'm most excited for is discussing their antagonists, namely, well, the rest of the world of darkness. Vampire the Masquerade First Edition, released in 1991, was the premiere of the World of Darkness. Hunter the Reckoning, at the time only edition, was released in 1999. That's 8 full years players have had to populate their World of Darkness games with monsters and supernaturals of all varieties, and that leaves them with a thick framework of story hooks to the capable storyteller. What was once a cast-off ghoul from their one game could end up a frightful mastermind against a group of newly imbued. While the Hunter the Reckoning line made books dedicated to supernatural antagonists, all of those books were extremely watered-down versions of the actual other World of Darkness core rulebooks. The good part was that while the original World of Darkness was anything but crossover friendly, Hunter bridged the gap by being able to murder them all for a time. Those supplement books actually told you they were watered-down versions, and to feel free to use the other more comprehensive core books to create their antagonists, or allies. It comes down to the storyteller as always. Something to mention here. You may notice I end up not talking too much about the follow-up to Hunter, Demon the Fallen. This was meant to balance the scales and failed hard, instead replacing Hunter as easily the most overpowered World of Darkness game. However, the real reason you don't see me hitting any Demon-Hunter connections is because, well, I don't know Demon yet. The good thing is I'm starting to learn it, and I haven't been excited about learning a new old game like this in a long time. Following that, I'll be making a guide connecting the two as they're extremely tethered together in the World of Darkness. Some may argue more than any other World of Darkness cores. So, how do our imbued find themselves in these final nights? Let's talk about it. Scary monsters and super creeps. Vampires. Okay, we all know the World of Darkness is vastly overpopulated by these parasites, no shock there. However, many don't really think on how deep their infection goes. They are literally almost as old as time, and if you think cockroaches are persistent, you haven't met the kindred. You'd think the method of taking them out would be super simple. Go in during the day, catch them napping, pull the curtain. What you don't take into account are the security systems that Ageless Wealth can buy, or his ghoul bodyguards, or ghoul pets, or, well, worse. See, you don't live long when you're stupid. These long fangs are old and smart, and while you think you have an advantage during the day, think again. And it gets worse once night falls. They'll use their cameras to get your license plate. Their paid-off police, ghouls, and simply bribed ghouls will happily give them your address, your parents' address, your children's names. Do not forget, your average imbued is an average person, perhaps even physically disabled. The messengers serve their own devices. What strategy does your Aunt Cheryl have that can protect her from an undead prince of the city who wants her and everyone she cares about removed? Think about that before you disregard the kindred. Werewolves. The Garou are a bunch of hairy eco-warrior hippies, and holy shit, they can cause some real damage. Almost as wide in number as the vampires, these supernatural pups are capable of doling out insane amounts of damage and taking even more. These fur babies are even capable of healing their aggravated damage in many situations. The imbued likely see them as savage, terrible murder trucks, running wildly through the world like so many other beasts. Should they take the time to think it through, they may just find they have more in common with the common Garou than expected. The goal of most werewolves is to destroy things tainted by the worm, one of 3 gods that they follow. And, those 3 things that made existence, at least according to the werewolves. Anyways, worm-tainted things are out of cycle, so to speak. Living things are not meant to, stay living. They die, and their souls are meant to move on, and their body decay to feed the earth. They're not meant to rise for time immortal and disrupt the cycle. That's like 90% of what hunters really want dead, though. Same with the werewolves, so they have common ground, assuming you can get past the, fur and fangs and claws and murder truck. Mages. Remember that whole suffer not a witch to live thing? And as far as the messengers are concerned, they definitely follow that rule. The awakened are seen typically as infernal by the messengers, and let's be honest, how many awakened are actually out there for their own greedy ends? The answer's a lot. Mages in the World of Darkness have Wanda Maximoff syndrome. These bitches literally alter reality whenever they want to. Granted, it hits them back, but that's what they do. However, many imbued can find common ground with the awakened. After all, both are still mostly a normal mortal. They see the world for what it really is, they fight back, etc. In fact, mages from a distance could easily confuse an edge with a casting of some sort, especially the Celestial Chorus, a group of majorly awakened hyper-Christians. Then again, on the other side, there's the Nefandi. They are man's worst nightmare incarnate and most certainly need to be put down like mad dogs. I'm sure quite a few mass imbuments happened at the scene of a Nefandi confrontation, and I doubt the hunters would see any awakened as anything other than a potential menace in that situation. Changelings. I'm sorry. I know very little of Changeling the Dreaming other than I don't really care to know it. All I can tell you is I played an Avenger Online on AOL back in the day, and let's just say my hunter carried an iron crowbar pretty much everywhere he went. I don't know much about Changeling, but I know iron works. Wraith. Now, here's the meat and potatoes. No, it's not that Wraith the Oblivion was my favorite or anything, but they're by far the best antagonists pre-demon for Hunter by a long mile. Why? Because the death of Wraith as a game line was the literal birth of Hunter the Reckoning. I'll elaborate. Wraith was a game line about what happens to you when you die. It was cool, but most missed the point at the time, including myself. Anyways, they had these crazy storms in the underworld that were called maelstroms. And the sixth one was set to start a new age and end the old one. Ominous. Anyways, in Vampire the Masquerade, there was a fabled ancient city named Enoch in the underworld. Mummies hated it too. I'm giving you a super summarized version, so don't hate me for it. I'll make a guide detailing the entire End of Days eventually, but god, that's not a small undertaking, so shit, give me some time. An old Ravnos vampire woke up. Sci-fi mages didn't like it. Two Kuei-Jin, which are demonic vampires of the Orient, went to war against the Ravnos antediluvian. Mean ghosts found a relic nuclear bomb live in the underworld. The technocracy also found it. Long story short, Lands of the Dead go boom. Like, all but completely toasted. So, with the underworld, Stygia being wrecked, where did the dead go? Up, up, and out. The earth itself ruptured, unseen to all but the most keen supernaturals, and literally began vomiting out torrents of wraiths. They were free, and they had wants, needs, jaded desires. This event was the catalyst that caused the messenger to act. With the dead rising all over the place, often literally, humanity needed some means of defending itself, of fighting back. These blights on the living are everywhere now. The world is filthy with them. Some remain ephemeral, trapped between the worlds, but others are far less considerate about it, instead carjacking a meat suit. That's right, these newly risen dead aren't as constrained as the rules that, Wraith the Oblivion followed. These dead are quite easily capable of possession, and even making their old, rotted body rise once more to pretend it has traces of life. Strangely enough, mortals just don't see it. These dead walking around them, even when it's their loved ones. Another tragic aspect of it is this. After a final death, with the underworld sundered, where will they go? What of the ghosts of children confused by their own passing? Do they deserve punishment when they're just throwing around toys in a store? The hunter's second sight is what allows them to see. The edges allow them to fight back. But now you see why Wraiths or Ghosts in Hunter are my favorite. They're just crazy versatile. You, on the hunt. Now we have a better understanding of your enemies in the world of darkness and the gifts of the messengers have bestowed upon you. But what about the most important part of Hunter? You. Please once more remember, your character is not from Hunters Hunted, not from the Arcanum, not from Project Twilight. You're an average person, caught at the wrong place at the right time and newly imbued. You're up against the world now. Lucky for you, the world isn't aware. Yet. So, where does one begin with a hunter? First things first, assuming you didn't get killed or arrested during your imbuement, you'll more than likely meet your new BFFs, your fellow newly imbued hunters. Hunters cannot detect other hunters, therefore, second sight doesn't help there. However, it's safe to say that the reactions of other imbued will give them away, assuming that, that the hunters even survive and get the hell out of there. But what now, past that? Well, a smart hunter will attempt to maintain much of their normal routine once the shock wears off. If these things are everywhere, they could be anyone. Second sight paranoia will set in, and that's natural. This time allows our hunters to adjust, and a good storyteller to begin really fucking with them. To be a hunter in the world of darkness, one must be crafty, but also realistic. Think about what you, the real player, would do in situations, not your Green Beret, because more than likely you're not going to be playing one. Will you be going home alone? Will you, follow them, lure them into your own twisted design like Jigsaw? You can sleep easier when you take them out that way. After all, they still look mostly human. Are you going to go undercover, perhaps attempt to infiltrate the beasts in their flock? No hunter is going to know almost any creature they come across, and they've likely never been in a cult. What happens when they get slipped the blood-tainted chalice and your hunter doesn't convince the monster they fell blindly in love with them? Denial is always an option. Perhaps you're just going insane. Ignore the lipstick on your husband's collar. It's lipstick. It's just an affair. There's no way Patrick is really a bloodthirsty creature of the night. He just needs more sun. A lot more. All of these kinds of scenarios build up what it's like to be imbued, and more importantly, how to pretend they're not. Giving themselves away is the absolute worst thing a hunter can do. Think about how difficult that it is when you catch your wife watching you sleep with red eyes, or your daughter leaves her spell book poking a bit out of her junior high backpack. Then there's the fact that you're now aware to the true happenings of the world. For your whole life, you've been a cog in a well-constructed machine. Obsession is often a side effect of being imbued, and for good reason. The enemy never sleeps. You lose sleep, safe to say. So when you come in exhausted time and time again, missing your sales quota, the boss fires you. You have no time to find a new one. Who has time when the world is infested? Now your partner leaves you. You forget to shower. You can't buy weapons. You can't buy gas. You can't buy food. And now you definitely can't hunt. Now let's go back. When his boss sees him tired and says something, the hunter thinks. You can't finance your hunt jobless. You can't live without food or human connection. You love your girlfriend. So instead you start, resting better. The boss forgets you. Life goes on. And the night belongs to the hunt. Or, at least the weekends. Inspirations. One of the things that makes Hunters so excellent is even with all the provided story hooks and whatnot, there is absolutely no shortage of media to draw upon for your Hunter game. I'm going to go in on this one here having completely forgotten what the core or any other sources cite, so forgive any potential repeated moments from any books. And there will be spoilers for random things. The first, I use this for almost anything, but for this example some specifics will be required. Supernatural. Namely season 9 through 11. They cover Hunter, Dean Winchester, older brother of the Hunter brothers. He ends up with something called the Mark of Cain and pretty much wrecks house while also getting corrupted by it. If that doesn't fit, going over the top with your virtues and going crazy with Cleve, I don't know what does. See, in Hunter, the higher the conviction, the closer to batshit insane you get. It's like going from becoming Batman to becoming the Punisher, pretty much. The next inspiration I'll use, fittingly enough, is The Punisher, courtesy of Netflix. The series covers many a method an Avenger may use to systematically take down a seemingly overwhelming enemy or force. While completely mortal, Frank Castle may simply be one of the scariest faces an enemy could see while living in the Marvel Universe, cinematic or otherwise. Now, if you're looking for more traditional comic routes with it, take a look at Garth Ennis's run on the comic. That Hunter's a horror to horrors. And considering how you could play your character, you could be too, if you live long enough. Another reach, but one might find fitting, is Dexter, further detailing how a seemingly normal forensic scientist may operate in open view of the monsters controlling it all. While seemingly innocent and simply doing his work, killer of killers Dexter Morgan silently works among the forces of law itself as he tracks down his next monster. One I find myself drawn to is Hannibal, the NBC series starring the amazing Mads Mikkelsen, and it was gone entirely too soon off the air. In 2 out of 3 seasons, Mads moves in secret, indulging in his dark desires while pulling the strings of his favorite profiler, Will Graham. As Mads, an obvious stand-in here for another species of potential supernatural predator, goes about his work, he begins taking advantage of both the underlying madness of Will Graham and legitimate mental illness. This could easily be a newly imbued hunter who's been under the thumb of a monster his whole time as a pet and is just now starting to see behind the curtains as to what he's really dealing with, an apex predator. But Will's become something of a predator himself. Another from the director of Hannibal, Brian Fuller, is Manhunter. This series documents the formation and creation of the way we know profiling to be today, as well as creating the designation of a serial killer. As we follow the path to creation of the Bureau, we see 2 normal men beginning to peek into the psyche of the monsters they're tracking, just now starting to understand how deep the rabbit hole goes. Moving away from television and movies, let's hit a video game or two. Hey, did you know that there's a bunch of series of games based on this titular game? The Hunter the Reckoning games, while obviously taking a hard cue from Diablo and Gauntlet gameplay, were 4-player games based on, you guess it, murdering the fuck out of the creatures of the night from left to right. If you're looking for action inspiration, you literally can't go wrong here. The last one I'll hit on for some inspiration is a game called Nightmare Creatures. While definitely over the top action-wise, this game covers 2 protagonists hunting down monsters created by Aleister Crowley. You fucked them up. That's it. That's the plot. But damn if some of these things that are coming out are like just really creative and creepy monsters. Honestly, if you wanted to look for what that could be, think of Vampire the Masquerade with the Zamisi. What they could do to ghouls with Vicissitude. In closing, Hunter the Reckoning is just fun as hell, with tons of gameplay value, even now almost 25 years later, and as my first larger guide like this, I love starting here. I'll be going on to elaborate on the Lost Creeds, edges, and further details, like my guide to hunting. I'm just glad to be doing this again. I'll be releasing my normal length Chronicles guides I've already written, but expect my original World of Darkness guides to be a bit beefier. I have far more experience here, and the edgelord in me screams for it. Let me be real with you. I'll eventually dig into aspects of vampire and maybe werewolf, but there's tons of that out there. And no worries, we'll give our take as well. I mean, obviously we just released the Tremere guide, but for right now we're going to have some fun celebrating some of the madness of the lesser known games as well. I'll support Hunter more first, then I'll likely step over to Demon, then maybe Mummy the Resurrection, and you know for a fact I'm going to be hitting Mage the Ascension. In between, expect me to visit some of the Stranger Off books from the World of Darkness, like all of the Year of the Hunter lines, Sorcerer, Demon Hunter X. There's just so much cool shit out there, and I'm excited that you guys are listening in. So, if you found this helpful, liked it, please like, subscribe, and share. My name is Chris. I'm the Librarian of the Pit, and have a great night wherever you are, above or below.